1 minute ago, Cassie blows up Diddy's courtroom. That's not love, that's control. It began not with a bang, but with an unnerving stillness that clung to the air like static. Federal court, packed. No cameras. Just the sound of bodies shifting on benches, sketch pencils scrawling frantically. 12 jurors, 6 alternates, and a woman 9 months pregnant walked into a battle zone disguised as a courtroom. Cassie Ventura, visibly composed and deliberately restrained, took the witness stand for her 4th consecutive day. A storm was brewing not outside, but at the defense table, where music mogul Sean Diddy Combs sat behind a stack of orange post-it notes. Calm on the outside, calculating on the inside. The stage was set. Diddy's defense counsel, Anna Esto, didn't come out swinging. She came out smiling with old BlackBerry messages, steamy emails, and professions of love that painted Cassie and Diddy as a couple wrapped in desire, not coercion. You and Mr. Combs were in love for 11 years, weren't you, Ms. Ventura? Cassie nodded. I believed he loved me. This wasn't just cross-examination. It was counter-narrative construction. The defense was rewriting the same past Cassie had painted in vivid strokes of fear, manipulation, and sexual control. Only now it came with emojis, party photos, and declarations like, I love you so much it consumes my life. But as Esto pressed forward, the gloss of affection was laced with contradictions. Cassie had once said Diddy was larger than life, yet now she was suggesting he had led a double life, one public and radiant, the other private and unrelentingly dark. For a moment the jury leaned in, because if that private side existed, it didn't matter how poetic the love letters were. It mattered who he became when the lights went off. The courtroom shifted as Cassie was asked to read text after text. Every word was a double-edged sword, flirtations, requests, consent on paper. I wish we could have freaked off before you left, read one from 2013. Cassie's voice didn't crack. It cooled. They didn't mean what they used to. That statement wasn't just a disclaimer, it was a pivot. The defense needed those messages to prove she was a willing participant. That these so-called freak-offs were nothing more than consensual sexual adventures. Adults playing. A love story with candles, oils, and role play. But Cassie's delivery turned it into something else, a chronicle of someone slowly losing herself. Of a woman clinging to affection out of fear, not freedom. Her words said yes, her tone screamed no. Then came the contradiction that prosecutors feared and the defense relished. No one who worked for Sean Combs knew about the freak-offs, Cassie testified. A thunderbolt. Earlier in her testimony, she had said staffers did know. That they prepared the rooms, brought the baby oil, set the scene. Was she lying then or now? Cassie tried to clarify. Maybe they didn't know the nature of what they were preparing for. Maybe they were just following orders, but the damage was done. A seed of doubt was planted. And in the rigid soil of federal court, doubt can blossom into acquittal. Esto's rhythm was surgical. She brought up text messages about threesomes, about Cassie watching Diddy with other women, about sexual role play in wigs and themed outfits. It was more than graphic, it was damning. Until it wasn't, because sprinkled among these texts were Cassie's pleas. You didn't even respond to my message. Going to sleep now so I can see you tomorrow. Or the night she texted, I forgot the iPad, the same iPad allegedly used to record the very sessions she claimed traumatized her. Why would she want to retrieve the tool of her own exploitation? But again, Cassie didn't flinch. At that point, I didn't feel like I had a choice, and that sentence, plain as it was, undercut an entire stack of defense exhibits. The words weren't just about the iPad. They were about the whole relationship. One juror stared blankly as Cassie described how Diddy grew increasingly controlling, down to demanding she put him on a VIP text setting to avoid delays in responding. What the are you doing? Diddy had texted once when she didn't respond quickly. He was relentless. He didn't need bars or chains. He had a phone, and a system of constant emotional surveillance. That wasn't love, Cassie said quietly. That was ownership. A ripple moved across the courtroom. The drugs came next. Cassie admitted she and Diddy were both deep into opiates, MDMA, ecstasy, but she didn't use them as an excuse. In fact, she turned the tables. Drugs don't make you do things, she said. Fear does. That line cracked through the prosecution's wall of ambiguity. It told jurors even high she knew what she felt, she knew what she feared, and she knew when no meant no, even if the messages said yes. "Do I have permission to set up a freak-off?" Diddy had asked. "Yes," Cassie had replied. "But I'm ovulating." That small thread held legal dynamite. The defense used it to say she was in control. She gave consent. But the prosecution could flip it just as easily. If he respected her, wouldn't that detail stop the encounter? Instead, he just promised to be careful. Careful with what? Careful with her body, or careful not to lose control. By the end of the day, Cassie looked worn, but not broken. She had been pulled apart, cross-referenced, and grilled under every angle. Yet something had shifted. The defense had tried to prove she was complicit. That the relationship was messy, sure, but not criminal. But the jury didn't just hear texts. They saw tone, posture, pain not faked but lived. And for the first time since the trial began, the gallery didn't feel like a gossip circus. It felt like the beginning of judgment. From the first message to the last, the narrative dangled between seduction and submission. This wasn't a simple he said, she said. It was a trial of subtext, of emotional erosion, masked as eroticism. "You're not super horny," Diddy texted. "Horny, of course I am," Cassie replied. It read like intimacy, but to the seasoned ear, it echoed obligation. The defense highlighted each exchange like it was a trophy, a museum of consent, one time-stamped message after another, but the prosecution watched each exhibit flip on itself. She offered to go to the pleasure chest. She asked, "Do we need anything else for the freak-offs?" The jury didn't just hear what she said, they watched what she emphasized. "Trying to find something to impress you." Those words dripped with a silent scream. The smiley face didn't erase the coercion. Then came the iPad. Cassie had allegedly hidden it, the same device used to record their freak-offs. Yet she texted him she forgot it and asked whether she should go back to get it. Why retrieve something that haunted her? Because forgetting it wasn't an option. Compliance was survival. The unspoken rule of abusive relationships is that perception becomes currency. If she looked excited, he stayed calm. If she forgot the iPad, he might escalate. It wasn't about sex. It was about staying safe. "I'm too excited," she had texted him. The defense seized on that phrase. "Excited for the freak-off?" "No," she corrected. "Excited to see him." Two different meanings. And in that tiny correction, the courtroom froze. Because this wasn't about semantics. It was about survival language. Cassie wasn't testifying to whether something happened. She was testifying to why it happened the way it did. In one of the most polarizing moments of the day, the defense introduced a text from Diddy. "Do I have permission to set up a freak-off?" Cassie responded, "Yes, but I'm ovulating." To the defense, it was consent. But the prosecution sharpened the contradiction. If she was truly in control, why was she offering disclaimers instead of decisions? Diddy's reply, "That's good, we'll be careful," wasn't about stopping. It was about proceeding with risk. Then came the role-play thread. Characters like Professor Lawyer Pilot. Suggestions to visit sex clubs with wigs and outfits. Cassie's reply, "Okay." Not enthusiastic, not collaborative, just okay. Diddy didn't wait for confirmation. He ordered the outfits anyway. The defense called it spontaneity. The prosecution saw it as steamrolling, his desires on autopilot, her voice a decorative fixture. As the thread rolled on, the jury saw the chasm grow. Diddy was planning elaborate scenes. Cassie was offering responses that barely resembled agreement. And when Diddy pressed for faster replies, even while she was in a recording session, the image grew clearer. This wasn't a relationship built on mutual excitement. It was built on compliance enforced by expectation. The defense wanted the jury to see Cassie as a free agent, but her words kept circling back to fear exhaustion and silence. When asked if staff knew about the freak-offs, Cassie had said yes. Now she was saying no. The contradiction became ammunition, but she clarified. They didn't know what was happening, they just followed orders, and that became a central theme, not just for hotel workers, for Cassie too. She followed orders, because to defy them meant chaos. The narrative climaxed as texts revealed jealousy, Diddy spending holidays with Kim Porter and their children, Cassie feeling like a ghost in the mansion. Then came the burner phone she used to talk to Kid Cudi, terrified of Diddy finding out. I thought it would be too dangerous to tell him, she said. When he did find out, she testified, he lunged at her with a wine opener. The defense called it dramatic. The courtroom called it chilling. Then came the balcony incident. Diddy allegedly held one of Cassie's friends over the railing of a hotel. The defense presented texts suggesting Cassie wasn't present. I saw what I saw, she snapped. That wasn't just testimony, it was defiance. And in that moment, the gallery didn't see a victim anymore. They saw someone who'd been controlled, cornered and coerced, but never conquered. By the end of the day, Cassie's exhaustion was visible, but her clarity wasn't dimmed. She was picking apart every claim of consent, every assumption of agency. The defense was building a timeline, but she was building a truth. And for the second day in a row, the balance was shifting. The morning after left the courtroom unsettled. The walls had absorbed too much. What began as flirtations and invitations had grown into something far darker. The prosecution didn't need to scream. They needed only to remind the jury of the weight in Cassie's voice when she said, I thought it would be too dangerous to tell him. The court returned to the most chilling point of Cassie's testimony. That iPad, the forgotten one, the one used to film the encounters. Encounters Cassie described as humiliating, scripted, and often recorded without her knowledge. But why go back for it? Because not going back wasn't an option. Because a missing iPad was a problem that Cassie might pay for, not in silence, not in bruises, in control. He didn't need to strike her. He simply needed her to believe what could happen if she defied him. That's how control works. The defense tried again to showcase choice. Look at the costumes, look at the sex club plans, look at the text daddy's home. Are you ready? Cassie responded. Yes, I just have to get stuff. That message could have won them the argument, until Cassie explained what stuff meant. Items she was expected to bring, baby oil, outfits, candles, and a look in her eyes said what her words hadn't. It wasn't a checklist of desires. It was a list of duties. She described heating the baby oil, alone, prepping the rooms, alone, arriving before him, alone. This wasn't kink. This was orchestration. Then came the baby oil revelation. Thousands of bottles seized from Diddy's mansion. Cassie said she bought them herself, heated them herself, prepared them herself, and each time her voice turned quieter, as if remembering the sound of hotel sinks filling with hot water, the smell of lavender, the silence that followed. But was there something in the oil? The internet had speculated drugs. Cassie shut it down. No drugs. Not that I know of. A wave of silence swept the gallery, because that phrase, not that I know of, carried as much fear as anything she'd said all week. Next came the holidays. Cassie told the court she was left out. Diddy celebrated Thanksgiving Christmas with Kim Porter and their kids, not with her. She was his girlfriend in private, a ghost in public. She fought with him about another woman, Gina. She had no relationship with his children. She was there, but invisible. The defense brought up Michael B. Jordan. Diddy believed Cassie had been involved with him during the filming of Honey 3. Cassie didn't deny it. But the revelation felt less like scandal and more like retaliation, as if even her emotional survival was a betrayal. And then came Kid Cudi. Cassie confessed she used a burner phone to communicate with him. The courtroom bristled. The defense tried to label it deceit. Cassie revealed it was strategy. I needed it to stay safe, she said. When Diddy found out, she said he lunged at her with a wine opener. That wasn't foreplay, that was fury. And here the defense wavered, because every time they tried to paint Cassie as complicit, she handed them evidence of fear. Every text, every message was reframed through the lens of survival. She talked about losing her sense of taste and smell, her arm going numb, the aftermath of too many drugs, too much MDMA, too much Norco, too much trying to stay numb while pretending to be whole. Diddy was addicted to opiates, Cassie confirmed. But when the defense asked what he was really addicted to, she paused. Success, she said. And for the first time, the courtroom laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was obvious. Success was his drug. Control was his fix. The courtroom returned to the iPad once more. The final text of that day. Okay, meet you at the hotel. I'm too excited. Excited for what, for whom, Cassie clarified. Just to see him. Because sometimes after years of pressure, even the victim forgets how to say no. Sometimes the instinct to keep the peace feels like desire. The prosecution sat silent. They didn't object. They didn't interrupt. They let Cassie tell it all. And the jury didn't move, not a breath, not a cough. Because this wasn't tabloid, this wasn't drama. This was a woman describing the cost of compliance. And the cost was everything. The day started with tension so thick it vibrated through the marble walls. By now, every juror knew what was at stake. They weren't just deciding guilt. They were weighing consent versus coercion, romance versus restraint. And that's when the prosecution brought them to the hallway. The Intercontinental Hotel. March 2016. The scene wasn't on video, but it didn't need to be. Cassie's voice was enough. He beat me in that hallway. She didn't whisper it. She didn't flinch. She just said it. The prosecution laid out the backdrop, the text that led up to the night. Cassie's reassurances. We can have fun. I don't want you thinking I don't want to. Diddy's urgency. Do I have permission to set up a freak-off? Cassie, yes, but I'm ovulating. Then came the delay. She didn't answer fast enough about whether to include the escort jewels. Diddy pressed, you didn't give me an answer. Cassie replied, love you, Pop. The gallery felt the static in that exchange. Not warmth, not affection, just evasion. Like someone dodging a landmine. And when they arrived at the hotel, things exploded. Cassie testified that Diddy became volatile. Furious that she hadn't responded fast enough. Angry she hadn't appeared as eager as he expected. She described being struck, pushed, cornered. The defense pointed to the messages again. But she said yes. But she went willingly. But she texted, I'm too excited. But Cassie didn't fold. She told the jury, there's a difference between saying yes to survive and saying yes because you want to. Her voice didn't shake. Then came the texts that shook the room. Diddy put me on VIP vibrate. He didn't mean metaphorically, he meant her phone. He needed instant responses. Needed access. And when she didn't answer fast enough, even while she was working in a recording booth, he lashed out. What the expletive are you doing? It wasn't a question. It was a command. The prosecution let it hang. The echo in the courtroom wasn't from the speakers. It was from the realization that this wasn't passion. This was pressure. Cassie testified that even during the planning of these encounters, Diddy asked if she was ready, then ordered the outfits before she confirmed. That wasn't partnership. That was presumption. They moved to another exhibit, the sex club. Text showed a message from Diddy Daddy's home. Cassie's reply, yes, just got to get stuff. To the defense, it was participation. To the prosecution, it was proof of conditioning. When Cassie didn't reply fast enough, Diddy spiraled. The text logs weren't erotic, they were aggressive. They showed a man used to being obeyed, and Cassie, showed the exhaustion of someone who had forgotten what freedom felt like. Then came one of the trial's pivotal contradictions. Cassie had said earlier that staff helped set up freak-offs, that they laid out the oils, lit the candles, staged the rooms, but now she said no one who worked for Sean Combs knew about the freak-offs. The defense jumped. Which is it? Cassie clarified. They didn't know what the setups were for. They just followed orders. It wasn't a contradiction, it was context, the kind that turns compliance into compulsion. Next, the jury heard the messages about recording, the iPad, the footage. Cassie admitted she once forgot the iPad and asked if she should return to get it. The defense said it proved she wasn't scared, but Cassie countered, that was before it got worse, before he used the footage against me. The room chilled. The prosecution asked, did you ever feel like you could say no? Cassie looked at the jury, not without consequences. And then came the jurors' reactions. One scribbled notes furiously. Another stared thumb on chin, lost in a different courtroom, the one in his head where choices can feel like chains. Finally, the day closed with a silent earthquake. Cassie said Diddy once dangled a friend of hers over a hotel balcony. The defense countered that she hadn't seen it herself. Cassie didn't blink. I saw what I saw. And the jury saw her, not a mistress, not a model, a woman who had survived more than a trial. They were no longer just hearing a testimony. They were witnessing a reckoning. Friday morning, day 5. The courtroom was quiet, but not calm. Everyone knew it would be Cassie Ventura's final day on the stand. There was exhaustion in her face, but something else to resolve. Judge Subramanian reminded counsel the schedule must be respected. By the end of the day, Cassie would step down, and in that deadline something shifted. The prosecution turned strategy into symphony. First came the return to the lavish facade. Cassie's 21st birthday in Las Vegas, the celebrity guest list, Britney Spears, the lights, the champagne, the spectacle. But the prosecution wasn't celebrating. They asked, did you know those people? Cassie shook her head. They weren't my friends. They were his. That party wasn't for her. It was for him. To show her off. To prove possession in front of Hollywood. The jury listened not just to the story, but to what wasn't said. Because that birthday marked the moment the private control became public display. Then came the story of jealousy. Cassie admitted it. She felt it during holidays. She felt it when Diddy stayed with Kim Porter and the kids. She felt it around Gina. And yes, she felt like a side piece. But the prosecution reframed it. This wasn't romantic drama. This was a woman being compartmentalized, adored, behind closed doors, erased in public. And when she spoke about Diddy's kids, the absence was louder than her words. Years together. No connection. That wasn't an oversight. That was a boundary. One he placed, one she couldn't cross. Then came the burner phone, Kid Cudi. Cassie told the jury it was her idea. A way to feel safe. A way to breathe. The defense tried to paint it as betrayal, but the prosecution asked the one question that reframed everything. Why did you need to hide? Cassie's answer was immediate. Because it would have been dangerous if he found out. The courtroom froze. Again, the wine opener, Diddy lunging, Cassie ducking. The threat wasn't in the contact. It was in the intent. The jury no longer needed to imagine what fear looked like. They saw it every time Cassie closed her eyes before answering. Then the emails. Prosecution showed Cassie's messages once used by the defense to prove consent. But context changed everything. I miss you, that dick, in our love sessions. Prosecutors paused. Was this passion or performance? Cassie replied, I was just trying to keep things calm. That word again. Trying. Because the language of control often masquerades as love. Then came a single devastating admission. Cassie said she used to heat up baby oil before Diddy arrived. A task. A ritual. something done without question. The prosecution used that moment to revisit the thousands of bottles seized from Diddy's property. How many did you buy? Cassie didn't know. And the question wasn't about baby oil. It was about how many times she'd been rehearsed into routine. Then came the drugs. The prosecution asked about MDMA, ketamine, Norco. Cassie admitted to it all. Admitted she lost her sense of smell. Admitted her arm went numb. Admitted she was so far from herself she didn't know how to come back. Did the drugs make you do what you did? Cassie said no. They didn't make me. I did it to survive. That distinction wasn't semantic, it was surgical, because the prosecution wasn't trying to erase Cassie's participation. They were showing the cost of it, what it took to endure, what she had to become just to get through it. And then in one of the most powerful moments of the week, they returned to the costumes. Role play, pilot, professor, sex club wigs. The defense had argued these were consensual fantasies, but Cassie revealed something damning. He bought the outfits before I even agreed. The prosecution didn't need to embellish. They let the jury sit with that. Because what does it mean to plan someone else's fantasy without their voice? It means the scene was never mutual. It was written, cast, and directed all before she arrived. As Cassie neared the end of her testimony, the judge asked if she needed a break. She declined. I want to finish this. And that, more than any text, any video, any cross-examination, told the jury who she was. Not a perfect witness, a truthful one. And when she stepped down, the air shifted. Even Diddy, still in his beige sweater and pressed slacks, blinked longer than usual. The prosecution had made their case, not by proving a single act, but by revealing a system of power dressed in affection, a system of obedience disguised as romance, a system Cassie stepped away from, not with a scream, but with a sentence that's not love, that's control. The courtroom was quieter without Cassie, but the silence wasn't peace, it was fallout. Every word she'd said now lived in the jury's mind. Every look, every hesitation, every contradiction followed them like a shadow. And the defense, they weren't finished. Not by a long shot. They returned to the texts. Every message that dripped with affection, every line that could be twisted into romance, they pulled it apart. You said you loved him, you said you were excited, you bought the baby oil. But what the defense didn't understand or pretended not to was that survival often wears the costume of consent. The prosecution reminded them of that. Over and over, they revisited the footage, the iPad, the forgotten but recovered evidence that Cassie herself once wanted to retrieve. Why would she want it back if she was afraid? Because she still believed she could be safe if she played by the rules. Because hope is a tool of the abused. Then came the talk of addiction. The defense leaned in hard. They described Cassie as unreliable, fuzzy memories, drug use, obsession, but the prosecution didn't flinch. Did you take drugs? Yes. Did you lose yourself? Yes. Did it make you a liar? No. Because if trauma erased truth, no victim could ever speak. The closing statements weren't just arguments, they were philosophies. The defense painted a portrait of complexity, lovers with wild appetites, adults making messy consensual choices, Diddy the misunderstood artist, Cassie the jealous partner. They called it a relationship that burned hot, not one that broke rules. But the prosecution didn't speak in flames, they spoke in patterns. They showed how moments of tenderness had been weaponized, how Diddy used charm as currency, power as oxygen. They reminded the jury that even predators say please. They reminded them that a cage with cushions is still a cage. And then they brought the focus back, not to the freak-offs or the texts or even the opiates, but to Cassie. The woman who, despite being pregnant, stood on the stand and named the man who'd built an empire on silence. She didn't need to win, she needed to speak. And in doing so, she broke something. Not just the illusion of Diddy's untouchable persona, but the idea that consent is simple, that love erases power, that survival means agreement. The jury deliberated for days. Some said it would be a hung panel, too messy, too intimate, too gray. But then came the verdict, not on all counts, not perfect, but enough. Enough to say we believe her. Enough to say the system didn't swallow her whole. And in the gallery a hush, not celebration, not even relief, just a shift. Because what happened inside that courtroom didn't just redefine one relationship. It reframed how we talk about power, how we hear silence, how we recognize the cost of pretending everything's fine. When Cassie left the courthouse, she didn't speak to reporters. She didn't wave. She didn't have to. She had already said everything. And the echo of her voice, steady, worn, defiant, would follow every headline, every podcast, every whispered conversation for years to come. Because this wasn't just about Diddy. It was about the difference between pleasure and pressure. About the thousands who've said yes with their mouths, but no with their hearts. It was about how we listen and who we choose to believe.